Yesterday I dug up an intact James shell, a James artillery shell, and so now it's time to start that long, tedious process of restoration. And of course, obviously, the first step is to drill these and get them disarmed so you can start working on them. Now, I'm not going to tell you how we drill it or how we did it. I can just tell you that it was a combination of kind of remote and more of a that was more in like a protected environment, and we were shielded from drilling it, but it wasn't a true remote setup. Now there's guys that drill these in buckets of water, and for the most part this gunpowder is degraded, but in the small chance that one of these things went off, you don't want to be in that percentage. So even though for the most part these aren't, I don't even want to say they're not super dangerous. It's dangerous. There's just no way of getting around that. But people drill these all the time, and they do it in buckets of water. Some have remote drills. We didn't want to take the time. I don't have time to set up a whole remote drill setup with the cameras and the water pumps, and we'd have to set it up in the cellar and all that stuff. But we did come up with a novel solution. Not even going to get into it. I don't want somebody to try it and then blow up and then be my fault. But anyway, so this one, before you can even get started to drill these, this rusty matrix, you got to get it cleared away, or you got to get access to the bottom of the shell. And luckily I found a nice big chunk of one on the same day. So you can see inside this cage that you have to get down to the actual shell, and these are full of, this is some kind of corrosion, and it just solidifies, and it's like concrete. And so you have to drill this out of the way with a masonry bit. That's your best bet to get down to the bottom of the shell. So now we've already drilled this. Not like I said, we just kind of came up with our own solution that we felt was as safe as we could do it. It involved, it sounds complicated. We used a tractor, we dug, lots of steel plates, all that, but it was definitely faster than trying to set up a remote drill. And on this one, I drill my hole a little larger than what I think most people do, because I'm going to tap this hole. We're going to tap the hole, we're going to put a big bolt in it with a long wire, and that's how we're going to electrolysis this thing. It's going to take a while. But I haven't emptied the powder yet, because I want to try to, on this shell, I want to keep some powder. I want to put it in a vial and just keep it. To me, it's historical. But you can see it's kind of goopy, and it smells good. It smells like boiled eggs, if you like boiled eggs. But basically, you're smelling the Civil War. But this powder will, I don't know if I don't know if this thing would actually blow up, but this powder will sparkle. It's still got a little kick to it. So that makes me think that, low and slow obviously is the way to go. But that makes me think that we were in a little more danger drilling this than we thought, because that powder's still pretty sparkly. So the only drilling tip I can tell you, or would like to tell you, is just low and slow and keep it cold. You don't want to plunge that hot drill into that powder. Now, I don't know if this powder in this thing will burn fast enough to blow the shell up. I don't even want to find out. But anyway, so this is the process we've gotten done. This is the first step. You get the matrix out of the way. You can drill these shells however you feel best. There's no sense in telling people not to do it, because we're going to do it. You dig up a shell, you're going to drill it. But low and slow, keep it cold, keep it cool. Okay, I've gotten most of this gunpowder out, or at least I'm going to save this. I don't know why, I just think it's cool, so I'm going to save this big container of it. That's the majority of it. and there's still residuals in there. It takes, I mean, that's all caked up, but this is plenty for me to save. And here's just a little bit left over. Let me just check this. Kind of a pyromaniac. I just like to watch it burn. See if it will. Oh yeah, that's a good one right there. Whew! Now that I got all the powder out that I'm going to keep, or what I want to save, we got to get the residual out of here, because it's probably just caked up on the inside of that chamber in there, because that stuff's kind of clingy. So we're gonna flush it out, and I just threw some stuff together so I'd have a nozzle to stick in there in the drill hole. I saw another video where a guy had a longer wire tube, a copper tube. But if you don't have a bunch of junk laying around your shop, like this shop's just, it looks like a second-hand store. If you don't have a lot of stuff laying around, you just need to get some, water pressure in there. On my last James shell, I used a power washer. You can see how much residual powder came out with just when I just turned the water on. It kind of blew out the back. I think I had it in there too tight, built up pressure, but there's still a lot of gunpowder left in there. So that's why you got to wash them out real good. You might think you have it all, but I'm telling you, it's caked in there and stuck to the inside of the chamber. So you got to clean them out good. So we're still rinsing, still getting gunpowder, and I think where some of this comes from is it gets up around that percussion cap and all that, where you can't really, I was using a dental pick trying to scoop it out so that I could save some of it just for the heck of saving it, but it gets all caked up around the percussion cap and that assembly that's in there, plus being stuck in the up against the chamber. So you just got to keep rinsing until you get it all. Okay, we've got all this powder flushed out. Now I'm fixing to tap that drill hole so we can get it ready for the electrolysis. I got a big chunk of James shell cooking right now. It's just that's that big piece I found on the same trip. But real quick, before we get into the whole tapping thing, like I said earlier, you got to get through this matrix before you can even get to the bottom of the shell to drill it. So with it being stony or like cement or rock, I start with like a medium-sized masonry bit, and I went down till I knew I was at the metal. Then I used a bigger one to get this hole that we got now. And I guess I don't have one, but you could go bigger and get even more of this out of your way, because what's going to happen when I get this tapped, I want to put the bolt in it for the wire for the electrolysis. Well, the bolt head's not going to go in there, so we're going to have to use this bit and kind of waller it out. That's no big deal, but I drilled it with a 3/8 drill, and I had marked this so I knew about when to stop or when you need to really slow down. And this marks, the bird cage depth. And luckily we had that other chunk of James shell, so we was able to take the measurements. So the tap's going to end up being a 7/16 quarter thread. I drilled this with the 3/8 bit, drilled the shell, and I guess you'd probably want to, if you're going to tap it for this size bolt, the 7/16 quarter thread, you'd probably want to use a 25/64 drill. It might make it easier to tap, but I wanted to use this long thing because, like I said, we kind of built a deal that got us away from the shell. And I have a big extension for that bit, but that 3/8 bit will still allow you to tap it for 7/16. It just takes you got to waller it out a little bit, and it takes a little more force, but it'll work. So I can't hold the camera and tap it, but I'm fixing to run this all the way down through there. I just started it a second ago. So I'm going to tap the hole, And obviously there's people that say you don't need to tap that hole. You certainly don't need a hole 3/8 in diameter to get the powder. That's true. It just depends on what you want or how you're going to do it. But trying to get a good connection on this and hold a wire or a lead to this and hang it in a bath of electrolysis, it's kind of tough if you don't have something that's you can really get a bite into the good metal. You can't just clamp onto this corrosion and expect your electrolysis to start working. So by putting a bolt in there with a wire on it and tightening it up, you know, I can hang this thing in there because it's not going to fall, you know, the clamp won't slip. And when you're taking it in and out of electrolysis to do your chiseling here to knock off this rust as it gets looser, and then you'll want to sandblast it a couple of times to see how much corrosion is left. So it's in and out of the electrolysis. Just having that wire bolted to the shell is so much more, I guess, reliable. It's always there, it's connected, it's got a good connection, and you're not dealing with clamps slipping loose. Okay, so like I said, you're gonna have to water this hole out after you get your drill hole tapped. So you have to water out this hard concretion, this matrix that's solidified. And all I did was take the biggest bit I had. If you had a bigger bit, it'd be a whole lot easier. You just bore you a bigger hole down to the steel back there. But all I did was just kind of water it out, and then you'll have to, you know, to make the wire and the bolt fit, you have to have room for the bolt head. That's why we had to water the hole out, and to get a socket on it. But you have to have room for the wire too, because, you know, I'm using some big wire. So it's all going to go like this. Hope y'all can see that. So in order to make room for the wire, all I did was take a little punch and just start me a little channel through this corrosion, and then just, you know, widen it. There's a lot of handwork involved in these if you want them done right. So here's the wire setup that I like to do. So we've got our bolt in there, and got the wire around it, and tighten it down against the shell. So now, I know this seems like a lot of extra work, but it just, to me, it makes the whole electrolysis stuff easier in the long run. Because now I'll have a steel bar over my bucket, the wire's insulated, so I can just hang this shell down in my bucket of solution and wrap the wire around the bar a couple times, and it'll just hang there. And then you have the end up here, you just clip your battery charger to it. Now, if you don't have a tap and die set and you don't want to get this elaborate, you know, trying to get a clamp to hold this, there's really not a lot of places to clamp. So you can take a lag bolt a little larger than your hole, and, you know, it's not as good of a connection, but it'll work. You can wrap wire around it, and you can start it in your hole, and then when it gets too tight, just crank it a little bit more and just kind of wedge it in there, and that'll bite into the good cast iron, give you a good connection. And then as long as your wire has a good connection to your bolt, you're good to go. Or since there's nothing to clamp to, if you had a really long lag bolt that sticks out, you know, you could wedge it in there so it's sticking out this far. Then you could put a nice, you know, tight clamp on it. Now that we got the James shell ready for the electrolysis, for those that don't know how to do electrolysis or have never done it, I'm going to try to go through it step by step, or at least the way I do it. There's tons of different ways you can do it. And if you already know how to do it, you can probably just want to skip ahead. But you're going to need a bucket or a container, whatever, to put your solution in. And you're going to need a donor plate. So you're going to need some scrap metal. The thicker, probably the better, because, you know, electrolysis eats everything up. That's why I use heavy wire. I use as thick as scrap metal plates as I can find so they last longer. So all I'm going to do here, I don't even know what this was, but it already had holes in it. So I'm basically just going to bolt a piece of heavy wire to it like this. I don't think I can do that and hold the camera, but basically you get the gist of what we're doing here. So once this is bolted, then we'll put our plate in the bucket, And then now we have, you know, a piece of wire sticking up to put our clamp from the battery charger. So let me get all this bolted up and we'll get this set in place, and then we'll mix up some solution and get ready to put the shell actually in there and hook up the battery charger. Okay, we got our steel plate bolted up to a big piece of copper. I got it kind of in the center of my bucket down at the bottom. And then I got my wire bent over to kind of hold it all in place, and then we can clip our leads to that little tail piece. And what we're going to do when we get some water in here is we're going to mix in some washing soda. Now you can use baking soda, but the guys on the Relic forum say washing soda is better. It's a little easier on the Relics, and I've noticed it works better when it comes to controlling the amperage on the battery charger. So we're going to mix in some Arm & Hammer super washing soda. That's what you need. I don't know where you're watching from, but we can get this at Walmart here. Now I've changed this bucket of solution so many times. When I did my last James shell, I kind of know how much to put in. But the trick is the amount of washing soda that you put in the water. That's how you control the amperage. And that's something else. You're going to have to find one of these old battery chargers. It can't be the automatic kind, because they'll just shut off and say that your battery's full when it's not even hooked to a battery. So you need this old one with the old amp gauge, and no automatic stuff. So you may have to go to some yard sales, or I don't know, you're gonna have to scrape up one of these. I'm sure there's other solutions, but I don't know what it is. I was lucky enough to just have one of these antique battery chargers. But the amount of soda, either baking soda or washing soda, whichever you decide to use, in your water determines your amperage. And so on like a full-size Relic, you know, to be safe, you could run it around 3. You know, 4 is getting a little hot because you'll start burning up your wire faster. But low and slow is always better. Just depends on how much patience you got. If you want to, you know, spend over a month electrolysis and something, you could run it down here around 1. But I'm going to do this James shell. I'm going to try to keep it around 3, you know, between 2 and 3, because this one's not near as bad as my last one, corrosion wise. So I don't think we're going to be in it for the long haul on this one. I think we'll probably be able to wrap it up in maybe under 20 days. But you stir this washing soda in. This stuff has been sitting out in the shop, so mine's all clumped up. Get this all stirred up. Get your Relic in there. And then if your amps are too low on the charger, then you just add more washing soda till you get the amps where you're at. I always try to make sure that I don't put too much in here right off the bat, because there's no way to take it back out except adding fresh water until you get the amps back down. So I'm going to mix this up, and then we'll get ready to stick the old James shell in here. Okay, real quick before we hook the battery charger up. This is why I like bolting my heavy wire to the James shell, because you can wrap that thick wire around a piece of steel, or I guess if you had a big enough piece of dowel wood, it would work too. But now it just hangs in there, and then when you need to change your solution, you know, every few days you pull it out, you know, wire brush your shell. And there's going to be steps through the process where I'll actually take this out, dry it. We'll use a little punch, a little chisel, get some of that thick corrosion off. We'll probably sandblast it a few times, so that when you sandblast it through this process, you can really get a good contrast between the shell itself and the corrosion, so you know where to focus your efforts on removing that corrosion. because when it's all wet and you're just trying to do it with a wire brush, you can't hardly tell what's what. But when you sandblast them, get them good and dry, then that corrosion really stands out. So this wire being bolted to the shell, you know, it stays on through the whole process, and there's not a lot of trying to get this clamp just to, you know, hang on to it. And because even this is the clamp, look at this clamp. So these, you know, these things are pretty heavy duty, but this thing is not going to hold that James shell. It's going to slip out. So that's why I do that whole mess with the tapping. That's something else too on your battery charger. You know, you don't want to, if you got like small stuff, like maybe a horseshoe or something, you might think, well, I'll just clamp it straight to the battery charger and hang it in here. But, you know, look at this clamp, how eat up it is. So if you do that, if you hook something straight to this, you're going to be changing this quite a bit, because that clamp ain't going to last much longer. Anyway, so we've hooked up, I got the battery charger plugged in, and I can never remember which lead goes where, but I think it's positive goes to your donor plate, and negative will go to your artifact. And so you can see I've got this mixed up. These two are hooked up, and you want to make sure the shell or your artifact is bubbling, and I can see the bubbles coming from the James shell. You can see the bubbles around the rim. So that means positive goes to your donor plate, negative goes to your relic. And I'm almost positive I've seen this somehow switch, and you just kind of have to play with it, but normally this is the way it should work. Now, like I said, I've done so much of this solution change, and I kind of know how much washing soda to put in, so you can see now that we're hooked up, we're running at almost 3 amps. Now if this wasn't, let's say it was only at 1 or 1.5, and we wanted to get these amps to come up so we can get this show on the road, get some corrosion blown off, we would just add more washing soda and mix it in. So everything's up and running. We got our shell bubbling. We're running at 3 amps, and so it'll stay here for a couple of days. And I'm gonna have to take this out and clean it up once. I'll have to take my wire back off because we got a club meeting, a local club, and I want to enter it in the Find of the Month contest, so I'll have to get it presentable. But we'll put the wire back. We'll go back into this whole electrolysis thing after that. But after a couple of days, you'll have to watch your amps, because they'll start to fall as this, I guess it uses up this solution, or it doesn't go down, but I think it just gets weak. So you'll either have to add some more washing soda, or you can use that time to take the shell out and scrub it down and get some big chunks off, and then mix you up a whole new batch. So depending on where you're at, you'll probably just want to add more soda to keep the amps up. So we're going to let this cook for a couple of days. We'll go to the club meeting with it, and then we'll the first time I take it out and do the whole sandblasting cleanup, then we'll get the camera back on it. You can tap this little bit of corrosion that gets stuck in these grooves where the sabot went, and a lot of times it'll just pop right out. This stuff is going to take some chiseling, but what I like to do is just try to scrape off. You can see where I've scraped off some of this other goop right here. It just flaked off that first time I took this out. So you can see where this stuff will just come right off. And anything that don't come off this time is no big deal, because it's going back in the tank. Because this ain't an overnight process, it'll take a while. So I just do a little at a time. Just chip off what you can. Anything that'll pop loose, can see on the bottom here where we got a real thin layer of it. Doesn't act like it's ready to cut loose yet, so we won't waste time on it right now. We'll let electrolysis do it. But you can see where it's been popping out right here. Maybe we can get some of this to bust loose. So this stuff's on there pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to dry this off and just let it dry for a little while, and it makes this stuff, I guess it kind of like shrinks and wants to pop loose. I don't know, that's my theory anyway. It helps if it's dry. So we're going to let it dry, and then I'm going to put it on the workbench and just show y'all how I pick off some of this easy stuff for now. Now when this is dried, you can really start to see where you need to focus your efforts on this orangey stuff. Now I didn't wire brush it, or this would have been a lot more visible where you need to work up here, but this is pretty clean. So right now I'm just going to focus on this. And what I like to do is try to get anything that's these big clumps that'll just pop off. So I use this little punch. It's kind of flattened on one. It's basically a broken punch, and just a little lightweight hammer. And I don't actually like dry pieces off. I just, you just put pressure on them straight down to see what'll break, what'll pop off. And on this, you definitely want to wear your glasses, because it just seems to always want to come back right in your face. So you can see how that piece in this little groove right here, they just pop off. So if we want this piece to pop out, just put straight pressure on it. You can just break off little pieces. So it's tedious and it's time consuming, but it does a more thorough job. In the end, you'll be happier with your shell. And anything that doesn't come loose, don't worry about it, because this thing's going back in the electrolysis. You can see it's starting to dry out now. It gets a little haze on it when it does. So I've just been kind of wire brushing it a little bit. Now my last one, I kind of stayed away from the cap, because we don't want to get a bunch of scratch marks in it, because we're going to do that different later. It gets its own little process. But you can see this light scaling here, and once it gets dry, you can just tap it with something, just about anything, and it'll just pop off. Just chip it away. And like I said, anything that don't come off easy, just leave it for now, because we got a lot of electrolysis to do. But what I wanted to get done is to get these holes started. And like I mentioned, everything on this bird cage or basket or fins, whatever you want to call this base, everything has a slight twist to it. So if you got a whole lot of corrosion here, it's hard to get your bearings on where to drill, because you don't want to just drill straight down, because everything's got a twist. Now this fragment I found is an awesome learning tool. It's like a little cutaway. I would have given anything to have this on that first shell, because I didn't have a clue what I was doing. But on this thing, you can really see how everything's laid out and how everything kind of leans and has that twist. So what I want to do now is just to use a masonry bit, because this is more like stone than it is metal. And if you do happen to get too close to the shell, these aren't going to booger it up too much. I'm going to use a 5/32 just because that's what was laying out, and I didn't have to dig something else out. But you could probably get you got room to get a quarter through there easy without bumping the sides of those fins. So, and I'm not even using a hammer drill, because this regular drill and a masonry bit should get through there. So you can see how this is going this way. but yet since everything has a twist, if you went straight down, you're going to hit that thing, the other side, the other one. So you kind of need to go like this on these. Even though it don't look like it, you know, we got this as a pattern now. So you basically could actually, if you look at it, you could just line up on the edge of one and drill straight down, and you'll just barely miss this other side. But rather than doing that, just go at an angle. And all we want to do is get a hole started in each one of these so that we can start widening it a little every time we take it out of the electrolysis with our little punch. So I can't do that, hold the camera and drill, so I'm just going to take this and carefully just start me a hole in each one of these fins at an angle. Okay, so we got a hole drilled in every fin. So from here on out, all we're going to do is just kind of work to make them bigger until we end up getting all the fins completely clean. You can see where that bit punched through it busted a lot of that old crud off on the inside. So that helps. The inside's a little tough to get cleaned out because you just can't get in there to work. But anyway, we got the holes drilled. I'm going to take it to the workbench. And then I'm going to go back to just chipping away anything that's loose now. So just like last time, we take the little hammer, just tap on this corrosion lightly, put a little pressure on it, and anything that pops off, good, and if it don't, no big deal. It's going back in the electrolysis anyway. So I'm going to keep working on it. And I probably won't turn the camera back on, but I'm going to chip away this stuff, and then I'm just going to put it back in the tank. And then I'll turn the camera back on in a day or two after it's done a little more. This is the third time I've had the shell out of the tank, and every time I've taken it out, it's the same process. You take it out, let it dry. I put it out in the hot sun just to let it dry real good, because this stuff starts to shrink and expands and contracts from moisture and then lack of moisture, so it helps kind of pop it off. But every time you take it out, it's the same process. At this stage, I just kind of wire brushed it, did a little chipping with my little punch. I've been working on this band right here where the sabot was, and this one, and you can see we're really making some progress. I got the whole nose cone finally clean, and each time I try to make these holes that we started in a few video clips back, we started these holes. The second trip out of the tank, I just made them bigger with a larger bit, just widen them to a 1/4 inch. And then on the last time, you can see I've been chipping away at some of this easy stuff, and I've been making these holes a little bigger. You just make them bigger with your punch. And you can see that some of them go quick. Like this flute is almost cleaned out. Like I said, that greenish, blackish powder that comes out when we were drilling, when you get through this hard, orangey, rusty matrix, and you get to that greenish powder, you pretty much got it whipped, because that stuff comes off easy. But this stuff, this orangey stuff, it's like concrete. I don't know how else you would get this out without just electrolysis and chipping away. I don't think I know the sandblaster won't work. I tried that on the last one. I don't think any amount of tumbling this in a big tumbler would work. I think you'd wear down some of this detail before you got rid of this. Maybe if you had lots of money, you could afford one of those air chisels like the paleontologists use to clean fossils. That might work, but of course I don't own one of them, and my only friend that does own one is an hour and a half from here, so I'm not going to drive up there and try it. So it's all hand work. Okay, I've had the shell out of the tank about 4 times since our last little clip, and it's the same process every time. Dry it out, wire brush, chip away whatever you can with your little punch. And you can see it's coming along nicely. I've been working on getting these flutes cleaned out. And then the last time that I had it out, I worked on the holes where the sabot attaches. And I thought this shell was in such good shape, I had a feeling that all 4 would still have their lead in them, but as you can see, only one of them still has the lead. So as you're carefully cleaning these out from the bottom or from the top to find out if they have lead in them, they might have a little cap of corrosion, but if you chip it away, like on my other shell, it had 2 with lead, and one of the holes, the lead was, you know, down in it a little bit. So I had to chip away some of the corrosion, then the lead showed up. So what I did was just chip away a little at a time, and when I got about halfway through, I realized it was empty. So then you can just clean your holes out. But I haven't quite got all these finished, so basically now I'm just gonna kind of run this old masonry bit in and out of that thing, kind of water it out. You can also use a Dremel tool with a burr bit, but I got my wire wheel in there, so I'm not gonna mess with that. But what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna take my wire off, and you can see all these little patchy spots of orange. I'm going to put this in the sandblast cabinet and just kind of lightly sandblast it. I don't want to get too crazy because I don't want to have this thing get that satiny finish. And if you don't have a blast cabinet, you could use the Dremel tool with a wire wheel. You know, work it all down in there. I'm just going to cheat a little because I do have a blast cabinet. So I'm going to take the wire off, put it in there, and do a little sandblasting. I'm going to stay away from my percussion cap and the little safety wire, and you got to watch out and not really sandblast on your lead. It's too soft, it'll just pockmark it. So okay, so after sandblasting, you can see it really starts to shine now. Now it looks clean. You might think, well, you know, that's good enough, let's throw it in the hot wax, or let's put our tannic acid on it, whichever one we're going to use. But if you look, it's not quite clean enough. You can see the discoloration between that bare sandblasted metal and this darker charcoal gray. That's all got to come off. Let's see if we can find some more, like this right here. All that has to come out, because if you don't, it'll come back to haunt you in the future, come back and bite you. You don't want to have to refinish this thing a year from now, or maybe even 6 months. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start, you know, wire brushing some of that out. So from here on out, it'll probably be Dremel tool and, you know, back and forth to the electrolysis. Try to get these perfectly clean. They got to be super clean. So I got to run to Home Depot. This brush is worn out, this wire wheel, and so yeah, we're getting close for sure. Okay, this is probably how many times? 1, 2. So this is the 3rd time out of the tank, dry it, and then it went in the sandblaster, then wire brushed it, and then whenever you get it out of the sandblaster, you can really see where that gray was. Now I'm pretty much done with this. You can see that gray ends up being corrosion, and if you've never done one of these and a James shell is what you're working on, first of all, congratulations for finding a James shell. But if you are working on a James shell and you see that and it looks like, you know, you're taking out part of the shell, well, it's corrosion. It's never going to stay on there. There's nothing you can do. It's like a dentist drilling out a cavity. It's just got to go. I mean, it's disheartening to see that much of the shell eroded away, but it's just, you know, anything that's going to come off was never going to stay in the first place. So what I did is I just took a little burr on a Dremel tool and just get rid of that gray stuff, that dark gray that really shows up after you sandblast one or wire brush it when it's dry. So you can see there was quite a bit of corrosion in here, but you know, this is where that powder charge goes off in that cannon, and all that goes in here, all that force, that heat, the blast to expand that sabot to grab the rifle and to spin this thing down the barrel. So this is going to have a lot of corrosion in it. But if you don't get it out, it's just going to come back to haunt you later. So, you know, you got to get it clean. And this one is just about ready. I can't think of anything else we've done off camera. The cap just ends up getting clean anyway because of all the electrolysis and all the wire brushing. So this is just from, you know, cleaning the shell itself. And you could leave it shiny like that. I might put a patina back on it using vinegar vapor, but I did that on the last shell. I don't know about this one. I might leave it shiny. We'll see. I haven't figured that part out yet. But now that I've gotten all the corrosion off and the shell is down to the metal, it's clean, and I was able to, you know, salvage one lead sabot attachment point. And you can see right here the lead coming through. The others were empty. So now that we got everything good to go, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to boil this in fresh water and maybe do it 2 or 3 times just to get out any residual soluble salts or whatever that's called that's in the soil that might be down in the pores. You know, fertilizer has, you know, microscopic salt granules in it. High nitrogen fertilizers, you don't want them in here. So, and especially I heard if you dig these up from like a salty coastal location, you definitely want to boil them in fresh water several times. So I'm going to boil this one, even though I found mine inland, just to make sure. I mean, what's it going to hurt? Just, you know, a little extra time, but it doesn't take that long. It's no big deal. So I'm going to boil it. We'll get it ready for the final preservation process. So after we get it boiled and get it brushed off again, we'll come back and get ready to either boil it in hot wax, or I'll explain the tannic acid, and then you can choose which one you want to do. Okay, we got the shell on to boil out any residual salts or fertilizers or anything like that that could cause it to corrode later on down the road. So we'll boil this for probably 45 minutes and then dump it. I'll do it again, give it a second boil, and then we'll dry it out, and I guess we get ready for the final stage, the preservation. Now to drive off all that moisture, I'm just going to put it in the oven for a little while, about 265. Evaporate all that moisture out of the pores and get ready to, I'm going to go ahead and boil this one in hot wax. You know what day it is? It's the last day of this project. Since we started this video, it's been 21 days have lapsed. So today is the last day we're going to preserve the shell. Now on this one I'm going to go ahead and use the hot wax. On my first shell I use tannic acid, and tannic acid is cheap and it's super easy. It's what the museums use, and if you have a relic that's in critical condition and just can't take any more corrosion, I would definitely go with tannic acid. You know, you put it on and it just turns it jet black, and it's good at preserving. But one thing I don't like about it, it's the only thing I don't like about it, is even though you just paint it on, it goes on thin, it's a conversion process, so it converts this outer surface to tannic ferrite, and it just makes it feel, it's like a thick coating. It becomes almost like a rubber armor coating, but not really. It's the only way I know how to explain it. But you just kind of lose, I don't think you can see it on camera, that fine grain detail of cast iron. It just makes everything look like just smooth. It just smooths everything over. So this shell is in really good shape. So I'm going to boil this in hot wax because it also turns it jet black, and it will preserve all this detail, all this fine grain. You won't lose any detail. And wax is pretty durable. Now some guys might just, from this point, they'll just paint it and clear coat it, and that's fine too. I just think wax is probably a little bit more thorough. Tannic acid is definitely more durable. But this one's getting the hot wax because I love the look and feel of hot wax, and it's not, I think it's cleaned up enough. I don't think I'm gonna have trouble with it in the future. So hot wax in this one. But earlier in the video I told you we got to get these things really clean or they'll come back to haunt you. Well, this was my first shell, and even with tannic acid, if you look close in this shell, I hope it shows up on camera, you can see little specks of rust starting to come through. Here's a good one right in there. So this stuff, if you don't get it clean, here's a bad spot right here. If you don't get all this cleaned out in here, even using tannic acid, it's going to come back to bite you. So since I'm out here working, I'm going to use my burr. I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to put new tannic acid on it and just touch up these spots. And then we're going to set up the wax and boil this one. Now if you want to do tannic acid on yours, because it's super easy, you just lose a little bit of detail. I use Rust-Oleum Rust Reformer. It's cheap. It's easy to get. I got this off Amazon, but I think some hardware stores carry it. And this little bottle, which is 8 ounces, will do a lot of relics. It's got a short shelf life though. I think like 6 months it gets a little weak, but you know, if you save up your relics, this bottle will do a lot. So Rust-Oleum Rust Reformer is what I used on this one. So I'm gonna get the hot wax set up, and we'll show you how we do that. Okay, the hot wax treatment on this is just household candles that we scraped up. You know, you can melt them out of a jar and pull the wick stuff out, just melt them right in this pot. This is just a bunch of half burnt candles we had in the house. There was some potpourri tarts thrown in here, or you can just go buy a brick of wax, but the deal is you want to get it above the boiling point of water, so about 265 to 300. This one's getting a little too hot, but when I put the shell in, it'll cool down, and then I'm going to turn the fire back a little bit. So on these, when you put these shells in here, if you're doing something other than a James shell that might have case shot in it, you want to make sure your drill hole, none of that case shot can fall down and stop up the drill hole, because it could build up steam and then pressure, and then it'd blow wax everywhere. There's nothing in a James shell, it's just an empty bursting chamber, so I don't have to worry about anything stopping up my drill hole. That's what you want to watch out for. So we're basically just going to put this in here. And we're going to have to go get some more wax, apparently. But the trick is, what you want to do is you want to get all this up to temperature and leave it until that shell comes up to temperature to boil off the moisture. Because if you don't get it hot enough and leave it hot enough long enough, when you pull it out, you're going to have that reddish brown look to it, and it's going to be waxy feeling. But if you leave it in here and bring it up to temperature and boil all that moisture out of the cast iron, you're going to have a nice dark black finish. So I'm going to add some more wax, and then we'll get back to this. Okay, we're sitting at almost 300, between probably about 280. And you can see it's kind of quit bubbling. I added another candle. Carla's going to come home and find all the candles missing in the house. I'm going to be in trouble, but this was an emergency situation here. We had to have more wax. So we'll leave this in here, and I'm going to just leave it in here for an hour just to be safe, and then we'll pull it out and check it. We're now finished with the James shell number 2. And as you can see, it turned out exceptional. Got all that detail left in all these fins. I thought my first one was great. I didn't realize how eaten up it was until you put it next to one that's in good condition. You can see all this pitting and erosion in the nose. All these little ridges on the fins are gone. But this one's excellent. Now when I took it out of the hot wax, it didn't have that even shade of black all over. So what I did to blend that was I used that high heat barbecue paint, barbecue grill paint. That stuff goes on ultra flat, almost powdery, and it dries in a flash. And as soon as it dries, I would just rub it in with a towel and then blend that in so that I could get a nice even shade of black. And then the absolute final last step was just to coat this with clear satin. I use satin because I don't want it really high gloss. I think that looks a little bit gaudy, but the satin coat gives it just a nice sheen. One step above, flat, and then you got that protective coating because this will be handled quite a bit. It's going to the Texas Treasure Expo this month, and I'm sure a lot of people want to pick it up. But you can see how well this one turned out. Got the little safety wire showing. The percussion cap took a little damage when it was fired and hit the ground. No big deal. And then we got one of the lead and the sabot attachment points left. It protrudes right there. So overall, I am super pleased with this shell. I can't believe that I found a second one.